Welcome to the Homeschool New York Podcast, your support at the kitchen table and advocacy in the world. I'm your host, Emily Hutchinson, and today I'm joined by Ralph Rodriguez, New York's new HSLDA attorney. Thank you so much for being here today, Ralph.
Thank you for having me, Emily. It's good to be here.
So our goal today is to kind of help our membership get to know you a little better as our HSLDA representative for New York, and then also to discuss some of the specific legislative issues and questions that we're working through in our state right now. So to start off today, Ralph, would you be willing to share a little bit about yourself and your story as a born and raised New Yorker?
Definitely born and raised New Yorker with a quick detour to New Jersey for 4 years. It's a little bit of a college experience, if you will, but not quite. So for those of you who didn't get to read the article that Emily published a few months ago now, just would give a brief background. Like Emily said, born and raised in New York. I was born in Albert Einstein Hospital in the Bronx. I actually don't even think it's called Albert Einstein anymore, but I just mention it because all four of us, my three siblings and I, were born there. Raised in Yonkers, and it's where I currently live. And so was not homeschooled growing up. I went to Yonkers public schools from K through 12 and was able to obtain an international baccalaureate diploma from high school. So I did a 2-year program of an IB diploma program. And that really set me up for, I think, good success in college because it was a college level course all throughout my junior and senior year. And so, you know, I'm able to credit a good amount of my success to the public school system. I know we are homeschoolers, but you know, for our family at the time, it worked. Homeschooling certainly wasn't in the mainstream. And, looking back, my mom says, "Oh, I wish I could have homeschooled you guys, or I wish I knew more about it." And, that's just kind of how it was. So Yonkers Public Schools all throughout. And I thought I got a good enough education. I don't think I was, missing anything academically. As I look back, I see different gaps that I could have perhaps been enriched a little bit more in certain areas. But all in all, I think I was able to, be educated and adequately, or as they say in the New York law, substantially equivalent, right? And so then I went to another public school. I went to a public university, the City College of New York, under the CUNY system. Many of you are familiar with it. And that, to me, was a big affordability thing. At the time, and I think even still, CUNY tuition rates, you just couldn't beat them. And, Columbia University is just 2 or 3 subway stops away from the City College of New York. Yet many of those same professors that are teaching in Columbia were also teaching at the City College. So I felt like I was getting still a world-class education at the university level. And so once again, continuing to shape my understanding of education. But also, and I'll pivot in a second, went to New York Law School. And that's a standalone school. It's not attached to any private university. But you can kind of see the trajectory of my educational career from, I guess, mainstream liberal to, a little bit more liberal to extremely liberal at the law school level. And so I say that, and I don't make a political statement. I should use the term secular. It was very secular. And I really value the time, especially that I spent at City College and New York Law School, because it was also the time in which I was solidifying my faith in the Lord. Now, I grew up in a Christian household. My dad is the associate pastor at our church. My mom and him were deacons when I was growing up. But of course, there always comes a time where a young person has to take ownership of their faith. I'm not a Christian because my parents are, or I'm not saved because my parents are. And so, because I was in that cauldron, if you will, of secularism, humanism, just, everything that we don't hold true and don't hold dear, I was really able to solidify my beliefs in Christ and in the Bible and what biblical truth is. And so I'm thankful for it. That doesn't mean that has to be everybody's path. But I clearly see the Lord's hand in my upbringing in that way. So hopefully that wasn't too much, and gave you some context about how I grew up.
No, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. Could we talk a little bit more about your professional history now, moving forward on your timeline, and
Mhm.
how God used that to prepare you for this position with HSLDA?
Definitely. So during my time in law school, I was also working full time at the FBI, in the New York field office. I'm not sure if I mentioned that in our previous interview, but both things kind of happened at the same time. I was set to take the law school entrance exam, the LSAT, on a given Saturday, and that Monday, just so happened that the FBI was coming to City College to do some interviews with graduating seniors. And so I saw the email. I said, I probably shouldn't pass this opportunity by. This sounds like a really neat opportunity. Law school wasn't a guarantee at that point. I was still obviously in the application process and preparation process. So I sat for a job interview, got a conditional job offer, and that was contingent upon passing a background check and all that good stuff. And so made the decision to enroll in a part-time uh, law school program in the evening. So I would do that from about 6 p.m. to 9, 10 p.m. on some days, all the way in the heart of Tribeca. So once again, I'm in Yonkers. So it was about a 2 hour commute. I look back and I'm like, God just carried me all the way through.
Wow.
All the while I was working full time at the FBI, also in downtown Manhattan. And I spent, that 3.5, 4 years of really going full bore into my studies and obviously having a daytime job and also involved in ministry. So a lot of things were going on. And people would ask me, so what do you want to do when you graduate law school? And I said, that's the $100,000 plus question. And there's a lot riding obviously on my education and the loans that I was taking out. And of course, as a Christian young person, there's always this tremendous amount of, what's God's plan for my life? Or, am I going to make the right decision? And I was saddled with those thoughts truly throughout the process. I thought I had to make the perfect decision and I couldn't waste time by, joining a firm or doing something that was quote unquote out of alignment with God's will. And I spoke with my pastor and other leadership at the time, and they pretty much in unison in concert were able to give me just such reassuring counsel at the time, and basically telling me like, listen, Ralph, if you are faithfully walking with the Lord, you're in prayer, you're in your word, he is walking with you, and it doesn't have to be this spooky thing where he, or not spooky, I shouldn't say that, but like he's not necessarily gonna come in a burning bush and tell you, go this way. He doesn't necessarily operate in those ways anymore. But his spirit lives in you and he guides you, and Jesus said the Holy Spirit will guide you in all truth. And so, I took that, I ran with it, graduated in 2019, passed the bar, thank God, on the first time. And I applied for two jobs. One was with an elder law firm, just doing trusts and estates, and nothing that I would ever have imagined that I would be doing professionally. I needed a job, and this was an open opportunity. And then the second one was with Alliance Defending Freedom, ADF International. So that's where I landed pretty much right after law school in December 2019. Um, and yeah, I don't know if you want to ask specific questions about the work there.
Yeah, tell us. I know you had two positions during your time there, so could you tell us about that progression and then how, especially the second one, equipped you for
Mhm.
this current position with HSLDA?
Definitely. Yeah. So Alliance Defending Freedom, a good amount of people in the Christian world, especially, are familiar with their work and with the important religious liberty wins that they continue to rack up. I think they're up to 20 wins at the Supreme Court, thank God. So they're doing important work on the religious liberty front. And so was really privileged to be a part of them. But many, at least in the United States, aren't really aware of ADF International. And so around 2010, so ADF got its start in 1994, but in 2010, folks at the ministry were like, a lot of these bad ideas when it comes to abortion or quote unquote equal rights for marriage, or anything else that ADF works on, a lot of these ideas are coming from the international institutions, like the United Nations, like the European Court of Human Rights, like the Organization for American States. And so, it would behoove us to have a presence at those institutions so that we can, and I used this term last time, hold back the dam of really bad ideas so it doesn't turn into a tidal wave. And that's what they started doing in 2010, starting with the United Nations. And it's right in our backyard in East Manhattan. And so I was privileged to uh, be afforded that open opportunity as legal counsel at the United Nations. And what I was doing there was basically working with like-minded member states. And when I say states, I mean countries, um, to do just that, to hold back the dam of really bad ideologies that are being presented and brought forth by a large amount of the member states at the United Nations, but also agencies and institutions that would want to see, for example, an international right to abortion be created by consensus, or harmful sexuality ideology be brought into our children's classrooms, um, obviously on the public school level. And so, these are the types of things that we would be working on day in and day out. And I just met some amazing people, ironically enough, from Muslim majority countries. So I wasn't really working with Christians there. For the most part, I was working with folks from the Middle East and Africa, because they were like-minded in these issues. And so I did that for about 3 years. And then I felt a tug to do something else. And an opportunity was open for me to join ADF's Church and Ministry Alliance. So now I'm in Alliance Defending Freedom proper. And so back in I think it's 2018, Mike Ferris was the newly appointed CEO of ADF, and he got the idea to join this to start this membership program patterned after the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. And so this was for churches, and eventually it was opened up to parachurch organizations, pretty much any Christian 501c3 nonprofit. And the idea was to provide legal support and proactive legal help for ministries who are, on the front lines and doing really important work, but they might be legally vulnerable. So I was really blessed to join in the membership capacity, just going around the country and meeting people and saying, hey, come join this great program. But also, doing the legal counsel work and working with pastors and executive directors and helping them out on the religious liberty front. So that was my work with ADF. I'm always happy to talk about it because I really believe that, as you said, God used it to take me to this current step.
Hmm. So why New York? You had mentioned you were in Jersey for a few years and then came
Yeah.
back and
Well, New York is home, but I'm so grateful it's not our final home. Wouldn't that be
Amen.
something, right? If we have to be here forever. No, but it's where I was born and raised. Went to New Jersey when I got married in 2021. So Bree and I have been married now 5 years. And so New Jersey was close enough that we were still able to go to our church in Manhattan. And realistically, we were looking at a better cost of living at the time. And so, that just worked out for us. But then once again, the Lord leads. And, there's so many green lights, if you will, when the Lord leads you from one place to another, whether that's geographically or vocationally, you kind of just see things that make sense. So a little over a year ago, we made the move to come back to New York. We don't know if we'll remain here. We might go back to Jersey, maybe Connecticut. We'll talk about that in a minute. But family is such a big tie to us here regionally. My folks are here in New York. Bree's parents are in New Jersey, but also the I guess the next biggest thing is our church family. It's the church that I grew up in, Manhattan Grace Tabernacle, and it's where Bree really solidified her faith in God, almost 10 years ago now. So, we are here. We love being with family and with church family. But in the natural, it wouldn't be New York. So it's definitely a move of God.
Mm. So, you mentioned Connecticut. Can you tell us the list of states that you represent with HSLDA?
Yeah, so of course, New York, I'm licensed here in the state, but also I have New Jersey, Connecticut, New Hampshire, and Vermont in my states of responsibility. So all regional. I'm grateful that I don't have to travel a ton if I have to respond and go somewhere within my states of responsibility. So that, pretty grateful for.
Mm. So, when did you start at HSLDA and what have been the highlights and the challenges so far?
Yeah, it's amazing that I still haven't been here a year. So I began on October 13th, and that was my first official day. It's a holiday, so that was a cool way to start off Columbus Day. And challenges and highs or highs and lows, whatever. I mean, I'd say the team at HSLDA is first rate. The people that I get to work with on a daily basis, although I'm remote, I'm not present in our office in Purcellville. I don't feel any less connected to the team. I know that I can call up somebody without any, hey, are you available? And I can just say, hey, I have this issue that I'm working on. You know, can you help me, or have you encountered this? I can even just shoot the breeze as if we're there together in the office. I mean, we have an amazing staff of attorneys, amazing staff of legal assistance, and that's just really the publicly facing part. I mean, there's so much support when it comes to HSLDA, and that goes for people who are working there, but also the people that we serve, the homeschool families. So I've really just been so impressed at the team there, the culture, and just you know, it's a great place to work. And I should also shout out TJ, the previous contact attorney for New York. He did it for over 20 years. And I think his hair is just fully black still. So I don't understand. I'm a little jealous because I think I have a few more grays since October.
New
Uh,
York, Connecticut.
there you go. And so, TJ has been such a help, just coming alongside me. And I know I can, go to him with pretty much anything and he'll give me his insight. But at the same time, he trusts me and he says, hey, it's your decision to make. So if you feel differently and you have a reason to make a decision, then, go for it. So that's pretty cool. I would also say the homeschool families. I don't just say that tongue in cheek or, as a cliche. I think it's a real privilege to work with homeschool families. As somebody who's not yet reporting, to the district, I've been learning a lot about people's philosophies and, what's important to them. Why they even homeschool in the first place. There's so many uh, different reasons why a family would choose to homeschool. So I've been enriched as I've been, helping out families. And then you just see how much they care, when if it's a simple issue or, the most difficult issue, most pressing issue that somebody can face. There's a level of care when it comes to preserving freedom and preserving their right to homeschool as the law says they can. So I've really been endeared to that. And you asked for challenges. I don't know if time permits, because there are many, but that's also what makes the job dynamic. I would say, there's a difference when, in my experience versus my colleagues. So I've been told that HSLDA gets a good amount of deference in other states. And, if an attorney writes a letter or calls in to a public school official, they would say, okay, sorry, we got the law wrong, and, we'll bow out gracefully. That doesn't really happen in New York. There's definitely a tug of war, an entrenched mindset that because the districts are tasked in the regulations with overseeing the homeschool paperwork, that somehow that means they own it, or that they are in charge of every single detail. Um, and so that's been challenging because, it doesn't just take one, two, or three efforts in a given matter. If a family calls in and they have an issue, I might be working on that for 2 or 3 weeks, depending on what's going on, or in some cases, several months with some of the more difficult issues that have been presented. And so that's definitely trying. I won't lie about it. But it's so rewarding when I can go from start to end, and, for example, get see a student through to college acceptance or admission, or settle a CPS or an ACS matter because we reminded the social worker of what the law says. When a parent is able to be satisfied with what the work that we've done, that makes the challenges all worth it. So I'm glad I was able to turn that challenge into something that was still positive.
Hmm. Well, I can't say how much we appreciate your advocacy on our behalf. I really believe that the Lord has raised you up for such a time as this, and we're so blessed to have an HSLDA rep that has roots in New York and boots on the ground here. So we're very thankful for you.
Amen.
Um,
I'm grateful as well. And I'll just say my colleagues all the time, they'll say, "Are you sure you want to stay in New York? Like, this is crazy," especially if I have somebody cover, the state, as a legal assistant will be like, "Why are you in New York?" And I'll simply say, "Well, the Lord hasn't, given a release yet." So, and
mhm,
and I can't, overstate that, or understate it. It's just what it is. If tomorrow he says you guys got to move, then we have to listen. But until he says so, we're here and we're grateful to be.
mm, thank you. So last question, kind of on a personal note,
Mhm.
with your story, and then we'll move into a little bit more of a Q&A with some New York specific legislation that we're seeing right now. But you have mentioned that you're planning to home educate your children when the time comes. So
Mhm.
could you talk a little bit about what led you and your wife to that decision?
Yeah, so I think last time I talked about my work at ADF, specifically at ADF International, just knowing about this comprehensive sexuality education upfront that's really overcome the UN and the entities that work with it, but also it's crept into the public schools. We know that. And so I was aware of it early on in my career, and there's only so many ways that you can opt out of things, and either way, your child is going to be exposed to it. I know what my experience was in high school, and it was, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, very secular, very, opposite of what we would teach our kids, but it still wasn't all that bad. I feel like there were still some guardrails when I was in high school, or even in middle school. And so it just seems like the tide has dramatically shifted. And so early on in our marriage, we decided that we would homeschool. There was also a CPS matter that our family member went through, and it was related to things that were occurring in the public school. And when I saw how my family members were treated, I said, I think we need to avoid this situation at all costs. Obviously, we have so many homeschool families who are met by ACS, CPS, and so that doesn't totally remove that possibility. But at least when it comes to public school involvement and a family going through that ordeal, my wife said, "Yeah, absolutely, we'll homeschool." I thought I had to convince her because I'm the lawyer and the one who makes arguments and presents facts and all that. I said it and she agreed right away. So I was grateful for that we had a true meeting of the minds. Two shall become one, right? So we are definitely like-minded when it comes to all things education.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, definitely.
So could you just briefly tell us a little bit about HSLDA and what you do as an organization, just in case we have any listeners who are not familiar with it? And
Mhm.
then maybe walk us through some of the basic things, kind of common issues that you see, the day-to-day things you spend most of your time on, and what families
Yeah,
can expect.
definitely. So, right before maybe as I came on to HSLDA, our tagline at the time was making homeschooling um, possible. I think that's what it was. You would see it on our letterheads, you would see it on our marketing materials. And so was and is true. We still want to make homeschooling possible, but we know it's possible. It's legal in all 50 states. We have you know, our forerunners, if you will, Mike Smith and Mike Ferris, and all the stakeholders at the time outside of HSLDA. We have them to thank for the hard work that was done. So we know it's possible. So the leadership recently just had the good idea to change it to advocates for homeschooling. And so now you'll see that language a lot more frequently when it comes to ADF. And I think that's beautiful because, there's so many ways that we can advocate on behalf of homeschool freedom, on behalf of homeschool families. And so I'll take I'll take one part first. We do a lot of legislative advocacy. You might not think so in New York, but that's a different story with the legislature, and the legislative team at Homeschool New York does just a wonderful job in spite of those challenges. But in the areas of the country where we either feel there's a true opportunity to advance homeschool freedom, or there's a grave threat to homeschool freedom by way of legislative efforts, then we're all hands on deck. And I know you'll ask about Connecticut in a bit, but that's one example in which the legal team will step in and will provide testimony. We will work alongside legislators where we can. We'll rally the homeschool community in the state, and just make sure that good laws are passed and bad laws are not. That doesn't always happen, obviously, but that's a big part of what we do. And we're actually in the midst of looking at our 2027 legislative priorities, taking a look at what can be accomplished and what can be rolled back. Realistically speaking, given our bandwidth and everything else that goes on, but it's a big part of what we do. Legislative advocacy. We have a great new. Well, she's not new to HSLDA, but Elena Kilker, she's our legislative coordinator. And she just does a wonderful job at keeping us in check, keeping us honest with different things that we have going on in our states in which there's active legislation. So we're really grateful for her because she lightens the load for the attorneys when it comes to just advocating legislatively. So that's one part of it. And then the next part is contact work. Actually, there's a third part. There's legal advocacy in the courts, but Peter, not going to try to say his last name because it's very complicated. If you write it down, you can see, or if you read it on our website. But he's our general counsel and our lead litigator. So when there is an opportunity to advocate in court, that's Peter. He handles that for the most part, along with my colleague Darren. And so that's an important part of HSLDA, but it's not a large part. And so that's why I kind of just broke it up into two. So the second work is contact work. And if you've spoken to me on the phone or if you've gotten an email from me, then you obviously know what type of advocacy to expect on that front. So I get to my desk in the morning and I log into our case management system and I see, okay, I have 20 cases to look at. And they're all different things. This time of the year, because it's July, we're looking at mostly letter of intent questions. So I know that's another question we'll probably talk about, but the district found something wrong with the letter of intent, or there's something extra that they added on as a layer. Hey, can you guys help with this? And more times than not, we can. I don't see any time that we can't help with something like that. Next, we're going to be seeing IHIP questions, individualized home instruction plan. And the district said, I can't teach this subject, or I don't have enough hours dedicated to this, or I, whatever the case may be, it needs to be more detailed. It needs to be, and so you get a lot of nitpicking from districts. As I mentioned earlier, there's a sense of ownership from the districts, unfortunately. And we'll try to settle those things. Sometimes the parents do have to revise it. I won't lie about that, but more times than not, the parents know exactly what they're doing, and we just have to have a conversation with the district. I like to empower the parents first and let them know this is how you communicate back to them. So you got this letter or you got this email. This is what you should say to the homeschool coordinator at the district, just to keep that because you have a long-term relationship with this district. So instead of sending in the lawyer right away, I like to empower the parent, educate them, and say, hey, this is how you can go back to them. If it continues to be contentious or if they continue to push back, then that's when I'll step in, maybe write a letter, write an email, call them up. I'll speak with the attorney for the school district, and we'll go from there. Same thing with quarterly reports. Same thing with annual assessments. And so you kind of see that the school year never takes a break because it's from July 1st to June 30th. So there's always something going on. And it's great because I never have to wonder, am I going to have work today? Or I never have to wonder, is it going to be an exciting day? It's always an exciting day here. And so that's pretty cool. So I think I responded to the question, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great.
So you mentioned Connecticut. Let's talk about the issue over there and HSLDA's action with the Federal Department of Education in response.
Yeah, so most folks know that Connecticut just passed a very harmful law for homeschool freedom. It comes out in two parts. So starting next July, anyone who withdraws their child from the public school in order to homeschool, they will be met with a DCF records check, and that's Department of Children and Families, their CPS, ACS equivalent. And that will be looking into whether anybody in the household, any adult in the household is under investigation by the agency, and whether anybody in the household is on the central registry for child abuse or neglect. The problem with that, if it's not clear already, especially with the registry, is that somebody could land on the registry for any number of things, and it's not a court adjudicated decision. It's a very low standard of proof that is required for somebody to get on that registry, and they often don't ever get off the registry because they either don't have the means, they don't have the help, they don't understand what's going on. And so, there could be a minor infraction, especially in the early part of somebody's life. Maybe they get on the registry when they're 18 and now they're 30 something and they have children and, you know, they've either turned their lives around or at that time it wasn't, a very serious thing. Once again, we're looking at standard of proof. And now they can't homeschool because of that one placement on the registry. Now, the reason this was uh, passed and signed into law is because there were some high profile instances of either child abuse or neglect, unfortunate, extremely unfortunate situations in which two children died tragically. And HSLDA condemns child abuse and neglect and criminal actions in the strongest sense. We don't condone it at all. It's obviously we are for virtue here and for how things should be. But the bottom line is that because some people abuse their children doesn't mean you get to profile all homeschool families and treat them as presumptively suspect. And that's what the Connecticut law does. And so we fought it tooth and nail. You may have seen some legislative update videos from me, from other of my colleagues. There was a 19-hour committee hearing in the education committee, so unprecedented involvement from parents, almost 4,000 written comments of written testimonies submitted online. Almost 300 people signed up to testify by and large against the bill. And so it was just a classic case of legislative will, just plowing forward and going ahead with something because there was a stated agenda and they had the political capital to do so. We don't believe that this is going to prevent genuine cases of child abuse. And we see these tragic cases as failures of the child welfare system in and of itself. But so that's what's going on in Connecticut. The second part is, nothing new to New York. There's a notice of intent requirement that goes into effect in 2028. But clearly, this first provision is the most offensive, most problematic. So what we've done, because the law doesn't go into effect until next year, there's an issue called standing. Because no family has technically been harmed by the law just yet, we can't really sue. You need a plaintiff in order to sue. But we've looked at the law and we believe that it violates federal privacy laws because of how it empowers the school district to give child and parent information to the Department of Families. And so so hopefully make it less technical, we just filed a complaint with the Department of Education, alleging that the law violates FERPA. And they've agreed to look at that inquiry, and they're going to investigate and really look into the ins and outs and whether it actually under the law violates FERPA, and then they'll deal with it accordingly. It will hopefully lead to a compliance letter, a demand letter from the Department of Education to Connecticut, and that has strings attached, that has federal funding attached to it. So that's kind of the angle that we're looking at. That all states, all local departments of education want their federal funding, and so we hope that it's a big enough a reason for them to pull back on some of these requirements of the law.
Thank you for sharing about that.
Yeah.
And it's a good reminder to keep our brothers and sisters in Connecticut in prayer as they're
Yeah,
trying to.
especially Teach Connecticut. I worked with them so closely. They're wonderful. And if you could just thank them, or as you said, Emily, pray for them. They have a lot on their hands. They experienced a great deal of homeschool freedom for decades. And now the tide has really turned. So yeah, they could use our prayers.
Hmm. So back to New York, we're starting to see districts telling families that FERPA no longer permits reports to be emailed, and they're instead pushing people into BOCES portals. Could you address that briefly?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of intakes from that over the last several weeks. Pretty much anybody who is dealing with one BOCES in particular, I think it's Erie One, who continues to send out this letter. Ironically enough, I think some are being contacted by email. Now, I think they are overstating and even misstating the law. I've looked into it. I do not believe that FERPA or even New York education law, I think it was 2D that they cited, is violated by sending out homeschool paperwork via email. I think what they're looking at is an encryption excuse. So meaning data protection. And so most emails, most standard emails today, even if it's a Gmail or Yahoo account, it's encrypted. So your privacy is generally safe. Obviously, there's data leaks and hackers and all that, but I really don't see a problem, and I don't understand the excuse given. Now, having said that, there's multiple layers to this, and unfortunately, a lot of districts in the state have ceded their authority to BOCES, and they've contracted with this entity, and they said, you take care of the homeschool paperwork, and we're going to tell the parents to send it to you. Is that okay? I think that's the first threshold question. I got a question yesterday. Can they legally do this? As I've said before, we're dealing with a regulation here, not a statute. So there's different canons of construction and canons of interpretation when it comes to something that is passed by the legislature versus something that is promulgated by an administrative agency or by a commissioner in this case. And so, it's a legal quagmire or a gray area, because they've contracted with this BOCES entity. It is technically still a state entity, and that's just the lay of the land. So really what we have to look at is practicality. Okay, so your district has contracted with BOCES has contacted you. Hi, we're going to be handling your paperwork, please send it to us. No, but I want to send it to the district. That's what the regulation states. If you're calling and telling me that, I completely agree with you, and I understand what you're saying in principle. In all practicality, if you send it to the district, they're either going to send it to BOCES, they're going to tell you send it to BOCES, or they're going to lose it. And then all of a sudden, you, as the homeschool parent, are in potential jeopardy for, quote unquote, neglect because you didn't hand in a piece of paper. And so we try to deal with it in the practical. There's a lot of nuance when it comes to challenging the legality of the BOCES involvement, and we just haven't seen an avenue for that. So that's one layer. I would say another layer is this letter that's being sent. Okay, they're using this, I think it's called My One Portal or something like that. The short answer is that they cannot legally require you to use the portal. So if you're against using this portal, then there is no legal mechanism for them to require you to submit your homeschool paperwork via that means. Now, second layer, sub B, if you will, is okay, now they're telling me I can't send it via email. I've done email for the last 5 years, the last 10 years, and that's what I'm comfortable with. It's easy. There's never been a problem. Now, once again, in principle, I agree with you, but let's take a look at our first argument here under this whole portal issue, right? So the regulation doesn't empower them to use a portal. Mind you, the regulations were written in 1988, so we're dealing with a totally different landscape and era at that time. But it's silent on the manner. It just says send to the district. And so if we try to make the argument, you have to allow email, then they're just going to turn around and say, well, where does the regulation state that? It's silent. Now we will, should it, um, I would say, should it get to the point where they're only saying that you can use the portal, you can't even use USPS or UPS or whatever certified mail you want to use. We will step in and say, okay, we think that's outside of the bounds because you're disenfranchising, for example, people who don't want to use technology or, are uncomfortable with it or uncertain. And, this is a tried and true way. You can just mail it in. We will step in at that point. I think it's just a difficult legal argument to make to parent on behalf of parents to the BOCES in which we would insist that they allow email to be used. I know that's a bit of an unfortunate answer to hear, but it's kind of what I've been telling families. If you don't want to use the portal, which you don't have to use, then unfortunately you will have to use the USPS system or some other mail system. It takes a little bit more work. It's more costly, obviously, but we're already dealing with an imperfect system. By God's grace, we're trying to fix that down the line. Um, but this is what's in front of us right now. We have to deal with in the practical and the pragmatic and what reality is presenting itself. So if I get any pushback from other legal scholars out there, please come and speak to me because I'd love to talk about it. It's an emerging issue, especially this year, and I don't mean to insist that I have the perfect answer, but that's kind of the landscape of how we're treating that issue right now.
Hmm. A complicated issue. Thank you for taking the time to walk us through
Complicate an issue on something that should not be complicated,
that. Hmm.
unfortunately. And I totally sympathize with parents who are frustrated and who are confused, bewildered. Why is this happening? You have no argument for me there. Um, but once again, practicality and how to go about things. But they're smarter people than I, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you, whoever's listening to this podcast. If you have a golden solution, please come come talk to me.
Mm. So, on the legislative front, what do you think homeschool families should be doing proactively? Do you have any encouragement for um, things that we should be striving for?
Yeah, I would say a big bill that is constantly talked about is related to the letter of substantial equivalency. So I think it's hopefully I'm getting it right, but S41 it was last year or this past year, and unfortunately it didn't go anywhere. It was just sitting in committee. But apparently we do have some good allies in the legislature. Once again, shout out to the legislative team at Homeschool New York. I think you guys just do a fantastic job of maintaining those relationships and getting concessions from these legislators. But it's a huge legislator, and there are priorities that abound way more than homeschool law, unfortunately. And so it's an uphill battle. It's an uphill road. I would say, and this is more relevant for legacy members, or perhaps you're a member and you're still homeschooling your children, but you've had one or two that have graduated. I would say document and report to either Homeschool New York or HSLDA instances in which a lack of substantial equivalency, a lack of letter of substantial equivalency has harmed your child or your family because you didn't have that piece of paper. They weren't able to go to their first college of choice, or they were delayed, or whatever. They had to take the GED. Those are real consequences of a discretionary choice by the superintendent or by the district. So if we could get that bill passed, that would require superintendents to write that letter upon demonstration of fulfilling all of the requirements of 100.10. That would be gold. I know there's been appeals, and we could do a better job also at HSLD of documenting them and looking at all the people that we help. But if we get that information to the main sponsor, we've been told that it would help a great deal at convincing people of the need for this. So I think that's one proactive thing. I think another thing is get engaged in your local politics, and I mean local, down to the school board. And it truly matters who is on your board of education. And I'll give a concrete example. We've been helping out, and we got to tag team, Homeschool New York and I, a bunch of families from Edmiston School District, Central School District. And I think that might be by you, Emily, right?
Fairly
Somewhere,
close, yeah.
somewhere upstate.
Yeah.
And
I mean, it's about an hour, but I consider that close. So
right, right, there you go. Remember, I told you my commute from Yonkers to Tribeca was 2 hours.
yeah, yeah.
And so, we long story, hopefully short, but the superintendent created a bad policy saying that no parents would be able to administer the annual assessment to their children. She believes the parents are biased, that they cannot objectively administer these assessments, even though the regulations and New York State Education Department questions and answers say that parents can do so with the consent of the district. So she's just kind of taken that consent of the district and ran with it. And she has this position, and so it's affected a lot of families. We had multiple meetings with these families, and the first step, according to the regulation, is okay, if you don't get to convince the superintendent, then you go to your board of education, and you go to the board of ed meeting. And so that was another stop sign, if you will, or stonewall, because the board upheld the superintendent's decision unanimously. And so the idea behind getting involved is, well, let's try to be more responsible for the people who get on the board. These are local elections, and these are people that you can vote for or advocate for or against. It doesn't necessarily need to be political, but it can and absolutely should be personal. These are people that at the end of the day in New York are making decisions on behalf of your children and families. So if we could start to change the tide of the composition, we might not necessarily be able to do so with the New York legislature, right? That's a behemoth. Hopefully soon, we pray soon, but something that you can, I think, more closely impact is, your board of education and how that is composed and the decisions that flow from that. So I would say those are the two things that stand out to me.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
And we do ask to our listeners if you're experiencing any legislative or regulatory issues with your local school districts or otherwise,